In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold. The Abracast. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
All right, on the line with us this evening, we have Reverend Bill Bean. Bill is a deliverance minister, a life coach, and author of The Connection, Dark Force, and Stranger Fiction. He is a spiritual warfare deliverance minister and an exorcist. You can find his information at billbean.net. Bill, thank you so much for taking time to come on with us tonight.
Oh, it's my pleasure, John. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I kind of have a generic place to start with all my folks that come on, and that is, I want to know if you were raised in a religious environment and what that was like when you were growing up.
No, I wasn't. And, you know, my parents believed in God, but we never had any type of faith-based upbringing. You know, we never attended church as children. We were never baptized, nothing like that. So this calling on my life from God came much later in my life.
Yeah, it's interesting where you kind of ended up then to where you kind of started out. So,
yeah, it's all come full circle, that's for sure.
So, I really wanted to have you on. We're starting to get into this series on spiritual warfare. So I thought that you would be a perfect guest to kind of come on and talk to us about some of your experiences.
Yeah, and I thank you for that, John. And, you know, I praise God for, and when I say that, you know, I'm not one of these phony televangelists that get on the TV set and praise God, praise Jesus. I don't mean it that way. When I say praise God, I mean praise God, because God totally saved me. It transformed my life. I was a victim, and we'll get into this story in a second. And I was, you know, physically attacked by demonic forces throughout my childhood. And I suffered greatly as a child and even going into my teen and adult years. And so I often have said, John, that I'm really a walking, living, breathing, talking miracle from God. And if he would do something like this for me, he will do it for anybody. So he totally and completely transformed my life from being a victim into a victor. So that's where I'm at right now. And again, I'm very, very thankful to God for it.
Okay. So one of the first things that we learned when we started talking about the spiritual warfare business is one of the first things we learned was this topic or this idea that these forces often work through family lines, meaning that some distant ancestor did something that was kind of messed up, and it sort of works as like a chain reaction down the line. I was wondering, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I totally agree with what you're saying there, and that is a family bloodline curse. And what happens is, you know, this will carry on down through the family bloodline, and it'll be horrible event after horrible event, and manifestation after manifestation, attack after attack, until, and I'm, again, very thankful to God for this, that I'm happy to tell you that it has stopped in my family now because of the calling that God's put on me. So it requires someone like me, God working through me. It's not that I'm anything special. It's just that the power of God works through me in a great way to do extraordinary things. And again, it's all the praise and credit and glory goes to God for that, not me. But that's what it requires, John, is that this vicious cycle will continue to repeat itself over and over and over again until it's stopped. And the only way to stop it is by the power of God. And so this is, I fully understand why these things happen to me and my family, because I couldn't be here right now where I'm at in doing what I'm doing, God working through me to help people become free from things like this without being there. It was necessary for me to be there to have a level and degree of suffering and experience to be able to connect with these people. So I could be the most brilliant man in the world, and if I walked into someone's home and they're trying to tell me what's going on, and if I've never had the experience, well, then we can't make a connection because I can't fully understand what this person is going through. So therefore, there's no way that we can connect. And furthermore, when people who have suffered high levels of trauma, when this takes place, they don't trust anybody and they don't want to talk about this. And they certainly don't want to confide in someone that they don't trust. So again, I perfectly understand it, why God had me to go through those things, because people can trust me, they can connect with me, and they know that I have been down all the long and dark and hard roads in life and have experienced these things. So therefore, we could connect and they could trust me. And then as part of my being this spiritual warrior and deliverance minister / exorcist, I'm every bit as much of a counselor and life coach as well, and I have to sit down and talk with these people in order to get to the root of the problem. And I could tell you this, in some of my cases, one in particular that's coming to mind right now, it took the young lady, no exaggeration, approximately 30 minutes before she could even get the words up. She was so traumatized as a child and had been molested by a family member, and she was so traumatized by that, it took her nearly 30 minutes to be able to get the words to actually come out and tell me what happened. So that's how painful this is for some of these people. And I carried a lot of pain and suffering around myself for many, many years, and I'm happy to tell you that it wasn't until I decided to make God first in my life and accept Jesus Christ and have a personal relationship with God that everything changed. And shortly thereafter, God put this calling on my life to go and help others. I didn't choose to do this. This is something that God put on me, and I really didn't want to do it, John, to be honest with you. I felt unworthy. I felt that there was no possible way in the world. I thought God must have a really good sense of humor, because, how could somebody like me go out and do anything like that, for someone, delivering people from demonic forces and performing these deliverances and exorcisms. And I never thought in a million years that I'd be doing this type of work. But God does make the impossible possible, and when he calls us to do something, he knows what he's doing. And so, to where I was resisting that at the beginning, now I find it, I'm thankful that he called me, and I find it very fulfilling to know what my purpose in life is.
Yeah, it's powerful. And what you're saying is making me think of like a lot of the Old Testament stories about, how, Noah really, in some cases, didn't think he was worthy, and Moses wasn't a very good speaker, but God tapped him to like motivate this whole nation.
Yeah. So it's a reoccurring theme all throughout, and we see it over. And I certainly join them in having that very same thought that there is no way on this earth, God must be mistaken or have a sense of humor, because there's no way that I could do anything. So yes, I totally get that, and I fully understand where they were coming from when God called them.
So you kind of mentioned it at the earlier. Do you think that your problems got started with a past relative doing something?
Yes, and the story goes that as far back as probably 100 years ago, two family members supposedly conjured up these demonic forces, and they came upon the family and created this bloodline curse. And many horrific tragedies have occurred throughout the years. and just some of the most bizarre things and demonic attacks and manifestations and curses and hexes and vexes and spells and you name it, it has happened to various family members over the years, including, things even manipulating births and causing what I believe causing death, right after birth and things of that nature. Again, I'm happy to tell you that it's over now, and I praise God for that. He worked through me to break all of that. But prior to those curses being broken, it was just an endless road of destruction, one tragedy after another, and just horrible circumstances all the way around. So I've written 6 books, and in my first book, which is called Dark Force, and I've recently written a 10-year revised edition called Dark Force Revisited, where I've added a bonus chapter in, and have also added in some events that came back to memory. John, when we suffer traumas and high levels of trauma, we try to block out things. So when I had first written the original Dark Force, it was very, very difficult for me to write, and I had to sit there and relive, place myself back into those things again and relive them. It was very difficult, one of the more difficult things I've ever had to do in my life. And so I blocked out some things. And in 2019, I felt that God was putting it on my spirit again to write another version of it and add content that I had blocked out, add a bonus chapter, about what happened after leaving the house and how my life was and how I was on the fast track to either prison or death. There are many life-threatening situations throughout my life. God was there each and every time to save me, and I thank him and praise him for it. But I wrote in the original version of Dark Force that these events began when my family and I moved into this 3-bedroom ranch-style home located in Glen Burnie, Maryland, in a community called Herondale. But it wasn't until after I had written the book that I was told by a family member how far back this actually goes, and about the family members performing these rituals and these invocations and giving invitation for the devil to come in. And that's when I came to the realization that this went much, much further back than, 1970 when we moved into this house. And I also was told that my mother, Patricia Bean, she and her siblings had many paranormal supernatural encounters in their childhoods. And I was not aware of that until after I'd written the book. So it gave me a chance to go back in this new version and add these things that I wasn't aware of. But it wasn't long after, and let me say this, yes, this was a family bloodline curse. However, I feel that my family and I were led to this place by these demonic forces, and I feel that evil was already present and manifest in the home when we moved in and in the area as well. And this is why it was so severe for us. We were in the middle of this perfect storm of evil coming from many ways, many facets, many sides, and it all came together. And this is why it was so powerful, it's so intense, it's so destructive over my family and I. And I could tell you this, I was 4 years old when we moved into the house. My sister was 13. And both of us, just standing in front, the home was semi-dilapidated. And my dad, William Bean Sr., was a master carpenter, and he saw it as a restoration project. And he did. He did a lot of work to it to restore it, make it look good. But in the beginning, it was semi-dilapidated, and it just had this very ominous look and feel about it. You could feel the evil coming from that house and even in the area as well. And you would walk in through the front door, and it was very dark in there. It was always dark, and it had this dark brown paneling on the walls. It was almost black. And so, I kid you not, if you go to reverendbillbean.net. You could see some photos. Click on the photo gallery. You'll see some of the pictures, and you'll see what I'm talking about, these dark walls.
Yeah,
and
you were you were nice enough to send the copy of the new version of the book, and
yes.
I really appreciate it. It was very compelling, and you have some photos in the book as well. And when I seen the house, the snapshot of the house in the book, I was like, we're used to looking at like these old like Gothic style or like the Amityville horror kind of house, and you look at it, you're like, oh yeah, that is a creepy house. But you're just looking at this little ranch house that could have been my grandparents' house in Cleveland, Ohio, and you're like, oh man, there is something funky with this house. Like, you just get the aura of it or whatever.
And I thank you, John, for saying that. And thank you for reading it as well. And yes, there's been many people that have gone down to there, or even ridden, just rode by. There's a highway that passes by there, and it's Ritchie Highway. You look down from the highway, and you could see the house sitting at the bottom of a downhill cul-de-sac, and a very large and deep ravine is located behind it. And people just riding by say, wow, you could feel that. I mean, it's just to this day. I very seldom get into that area, but if I am and I ride by there once in a blue moon, I'll look down, and and what I'm always doing is binding and rebuking and casting out, any demons that are in or on or around there, and you could still feel that evil attached to the house and the area as well.
Yeah. Okay. So before we get too far into this, I wanted to kind of back up a little bit and ask you about these bloodline hauntings, or bloodline curses, as you call them. We've heard that sometimes it manifests in different people, but the same sorts of afflictions. And that reminded me of like the cycles of, physical or sexual abuse in a family, or the cycle of like alcoholism in a family. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. That's what happens. So when the devil, he's looking for any opening at all. And, once he gets an opening, then he and his demons are going to kick that door in, and they're coming in. They're going to stay there until somebody like me comes along, God working through me to get rid of them. And they're going to establish these patterns. And like you said, whether it's any of those things or other things, the pattern will continue to repeat over and over and over and over again until that is broken.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, because it's like, it's like an echo of an echo of an echo, like throughout like this family tree or something. I think it's just like a fascinating way to kind of study it. So sometimes the way that I look at these sorts of things is like through the lens of psychology. My listeners have heard me talk about this like ad nauseum. So this is kind of like barking like right up my tree, this sort of way to look at it.
I'm in total agreement with you, brother.
Yeah. So thank you. Okay. So before we get into the house proper, I know that there's a lot of fascinating things with the area, of the area around, like you've already kind of started to mention, like the downhill cul-de-sac and the ravine in this Glen Burnie County, Maryland. And I was just wondering if you can kind of unpack this idea about the location and what that area kind of figures into the events that happened to you and your family, like the history of the area.
Yeah, it certainly does. And I found out that after I'd written the book, the original Dark Force, I started having people contacting me from the area. As a matter of fact, I started having some old friends that I went to school with contacting me saying, we heard your story, we knew about it, but, I never told you about mine. And dozens of people contacted me telling me their stories that they had, the supernatural paranormal events that took place in their homes in the area that I was completely unaware of. And so, yes, the area. So again, the combination of the family bloodline curse, the area, and the evil that was assigned to that home is why it greatly contributed to the destruction of my family. And so in the area, again, the house is located at the bottom of a downhill cul-de-sac, and behind it is a very large and deep ravine, long, stretched at that time several miles, and it has since been cut off because there's a big mall place there now that kind of interrupted the flow of that ravine. And interestingly enough, John, when they began construction and excavations and getting everything leveled out for the property to put that mall up, they found a barrel with a body stuffed in it. And I wouldn't doubt it for a second, because this was, again, this was a small community, this community of Herondale. And again, it's located in Glen Burnie, Maryland. For such a small community, there was a very high level of violent crime, murders, robberies, domestic assaults, you name it. It was taking place in this community. And again, I attribute some of this behavior to the demonic forces that were present in the area. High levels of alcoholism, high levels of drug abuse, suicide, all these types of things. And witchcraft and Satanism as well. And so it's unfathomable, looking back on it now, the level and the amount of people that were affected in one way or another and under the influence in one way or another by these demonic forces that were so prominent and prevalent in the area. So it was rumored that one part of the ravine, and I remember it vividly, it was rumored that part of the ravine was some type of Indian burial ground. And I can believe it, because it just had a different feel about it. I mean, and it was all this red clay and nothing would ever grow there. And it was just a really, really, not that the rest of it wasn't strange, because it was. And there was also rumors of Bigfoot down there. They call it the Gully Man, that there was a Gully Man down in there, and they had these tunnels. So this ravine, they had these bomb shelters down in there from World War II. And so these tunnels had like this little creek water running through it. The water would flow out into Marley Creek. And again, the tales were that there was a Gully Man down there, a big creature, and there were reports of such a creature down there. I never saw it, but I did hear many reports about it, and also the UFO connection. So you had high levels of sightings of UFOs, which my family and I did see one time over our backyard, over the ravine. And, the Bigfoot creatures, and there was a high level of Satanism in the area. I once, with other kids, found an altar down there with, I guess it was bones of a dog down there scattered about. And there were, again, the rumors of the satanic sacrificial rituals taking place down in there. So, boy, I'll tell you, John, again, for such a small area, there was a lot going on down there.
Yeah. So thank you for mentioning the altar, because I wanted to try to get that out of you, because I recall reading that either on your website or in the book. I thought that was fascinating. Also, before we get into the house thing, this constant mentioning of the ravine and this creek water, oftentimes in poltergeist cases, we see this idea of an underground stream or running water nearby. Do you have any thoughts? Do you have any thoughts on that, or how that might have affected this situation?
Well, again, it ties in with everything, and absolutely. So when you're talking about ley lines and stuff like that, and I mean, it absolutely ties in, and it just, it's part of the reason why these demonic forces were so strong, not only in our home, but in other homes as well. And I've been back several times as the spiritual warrior, over the last, I would say probably over the last 5 years, I've probably been back to that area 3 times on behalf of people who were having demonic problems in their home. So it is still, unfortunately, still happening there to this day.
Yeah, like you had mentioned before, it was kind of like the perfect storm. Like everything everything was just dialed in just right.
Every ingredient.
Yeah, like you were having like this family thing going on both sides, and then this geographical thing. So it's very, like I said, compelling and disturbing. And your book is it really tells the story very well. So I was hoping that maybe now we can get into actually the actual haunting there in Herndale.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead, man.
And, my mom was the first to have an experience. It took place shortly after moving in. And again, my dad, William Bean Sr., had taken us, with him, my older sister, younger brother, had taken us with him for the day to go over to my grandparents, his parents' house, the Beans. And he thought that he would get us away from my mother so we wouldn't bother her while she was trying to unpack and organize in the home. And so she was in the house by herself at the time. And she was in the living room, and she's, unpacking and trying to get things out and get them in the order that she wanted them. And it was during the course of this that she felt a presence come into the room, and she thought in her mind that it was my dad sneaking back in to play a joke on her. He had that type of sense of humor, so that's what she thought. And she spun around fully anticipating on seeing him, and to her shock, when she spun around, nothing or no one was there. And as you can imagine, she was taken aback by that, startled and scared, and, just totally unnerved, but at some point was able to collect herself and maybe convince herself that, it was her imagination or whatever. And she goes back to doing what she's doing. And then shortly thereafter, my sister's bedroom door slammed shut by itself. And that was enough to make her go outside and wait until we came home. So that's where it began. And I'll give you a quick layout of the house. Again, you would enter in through the front door. Now, as you're coming in through the front door, there is a closet right there. It's a coat closet. It was two wooden sliding doors, and that was the coat closet there. And this will come into play in a little while. And so there's a reason that I'm mentioning that. And so then you come into the living room, and you would make a right down a long hallway, which had this tiled floor. It was a hard tile. And oftentimes we'd be laying in bed and hear these footsteps coming down the hallway, and they would reverberate off of that paneling. And I shared a room with my brother, and it was the first room on the right. My parents' room had the second room on the right, and then my sister's room was across the hallway, the last room on the left. And I feel that room was the main portal in the house, and I feel that portal was located. If you walked into the room, you would go to the right, and there was a window which went to like the side of the house, and a closet very close to that. And I feel that the main portal was right in that closet, between the closet and the window. And it also played a factor in the linen closet, which was located at the end of the hallway, which would have been, connected to that. And so that was the main portal in the house. That room was always cold, even on the hottest of summer days. And that's also the room where the door would open and slam for many repetitions at a time.
Okay, Bill, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just was wondering, I know that you and your brother were pretty young. How old was your sister who was occupying this room at the time?
Well, when we moved in, she was 13. I was 4. She was 13, and my brother was 1. And so she didn't stay for very long because she ended up running away in the middle of the night. A couple of years later, she ran away with a young man in the neighborhood, and she stated in our story was featured on the A Haunting series. It aired on September 7th, 2006, and it's one of the most watched and rebroadcasted episodes in the history of that series, and that's what really put me on the map. And So she stated in that interview that she would have married anyone just to get out of there because she couldn't take it anymore. She was the first one to suffer to have a physical encounter. I wouldn't necessarily call it an attack. Maybe it was leading to that, but thank God for her, she was able to scream out and alert my parents, and they came running into the room. But it was the middle of the night, probably late in 1970. And she was asleep in her bed, and she said that she felt a presence, that she was awakened by a presence, and she felt it there, but she couldn't see anyone or anything there, but she knew something was there. And she started to get up. She was going to get up and go and get my parents, and an unseen, invisible force grabbed her by her leg, and she let out a scream. So thank God for her, she was able to scream. My parents came into the room. They didn't see anything. However, she did have red marks on her leg where she said something had grabbed her leg. So she never again felt comfortable. After that, she always felt like she was being watched and followed. So she couldn't wait to get out of that house.
Yeah, well, I don't blame her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the reason I asked that is because in conjunction with these events that happen with the running water nearby is also young women are also tied into that, specifically poltergeist activity. So I just wanted to kind of frame that up a little bit and kind of get your thoughts on that aspect of it.
I totally agree again. Yeah, I mean, it all comes in, and every ingredient was there. Every single ingredient was there for this, this horrific storm of evil that came upon my family. So yeah, everything you're saying, I agree with, because it's true and it happened. And unfortunately for her, later in life, and again, now by 73, she's gone and she's married. And interestingly enough, John, she had gotten pregnant, and her baby had actually died inside of her, and she almost died as well. And so I find that very interesting that, just a little bit later in life that, and it would have been her firstborn son, it would have been a boy. And again, the baby died inside of her, and she nearly died as well. And another interesting note is that my mother, my sister was born in 1957, and my mother had another child in 1963, and it would have been the first male child. He lived for a very short time, but he too died. So isn't that interesting that my mother's first male child died, and then my sister's, first male child died as well?
Yeah, it was just kind of the manifestation of the same affliction going through the things like we were talking about earlier. Yeah. Absolutely.
And then another interesting correlation is that my mother died on October 5th, 1981 of a cerebral hemorrhage at the age of 44. That was 10 years to the day of my Aunt Colleen, my Uncle Clifford's wife, which is my father's brother, my father's older brother, his wife. She died on October 5th, 1971.
Wow. I think we're going to be talking about Uncle Clifford again, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Okay. This month in the Fulgore Correspondentia, we have an Armor of God illustration for our spiritual warfare episodes. There's an updated brief timeline of Genesis, according to me, and the wrong son, wrong blessing, wrong curse graphic, since we are still working through Esau and Jacob. There's a tarot card preview and also the February Abra fast schedule. We're doing another fast cycle in February. If you want to get the dates, go ahead and hit that up. All you got to do is sign into the mailing list and receive the Fulgore Correspondentia. The Fellowcraft episode is the UFO Conspiracy Part 2. We are continuing to dissect the work of classic conspiracy theorist Milton William Cooper. All you got to do is sign up for the $3 tier on Patreon or Subscribestar.
Learn more at abracast.com.
Get bonus content by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that, plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.
Okay, so do you want to get back into the tale of the haunting, or?
Absolutely. So she,
okay.
Again, she's traumatized, obviously. My parents have run into the room. They turn the light on. They don't see anything there. They see the red marks on her leg. And then she, again, was never comfortable living there in the house after that. And also another thing that started to take place, my parents were married in 1956. And again, my sister was born in 57. The child that died was born in 63. I was born in 66, and my brother was born in 69. And another interesting dynamic started to take place, and that was that my father came under attack first. And this was after my sister, but he's the one that really came under severe spiritual attack. My parents were social drinkers, and back there, in late 60s, early 70s, people had house parties all the time and family gatherings and things of that nature. And so they all got together and they drank and they ate crabs and all that kind of stuff. And, had these parties, and whether it was Christmas parties or birthdays or whatever, they did those things. And it started to change. The more he came under physical attack, the more he, I believe, was trying to escape reality, in the sense that I think he was so confounded in his mind. My dad was a man's man. He was a very rugged individual and was used to being in control of every situation, and suddenly found himself in a situation that he couldn't control. And I think it led to him trying to escape reality. And again, my parents were social drinkers, but then he started to escalate his drinking. And it wasn't long, after these spiritual attacks had begun to take place over him and upon him, that he started to really immerse himself into this world of alcoholism. And he would stay out, and he was a contractor. So he, again, was a master carpenter, had his own contracting business. And he started staying out. He'd get off of work and then go to the bars and stay out till late and then come home. And this started creating problems between he and my mother. And then, unfortunately, and it's something that no one would have ever thought would have taken place, but by the year 1973, he began to physically abuse my mother on a regular basis. Between 1973 and 1975, nearly killed her on several occasions. And I have no doubt that while under the influence of alcohol, these demonic forces were able to fuel his rage towards my mother. And it is a miracle that he didn't kill her.
That's terrifying. I mean, not to get too inside or whatever, but I've been in situations as a young child that's like this, and my heart really goes out for you, especially when I was reading that book. I was like, I relate to Bill right now.
Thank you, my brother. And it's very traumatic. When you see things like that, it's horrific. It's traumatic. It's such a helpless feeling. And again, this is going right into the theme of this perfect storm, because the devil feeds off of all these things. All life operates off of frequency and vibration. So we all operate on frequency and vibration. So if our frequency and vibration is high, life is good, life is positive, we're moving forward. But if we're on low, life is terrible. And it is, just like the black clouds over somebody's head, and one bad thing after another happens. And that's how it was back then. And unfortunately for my mother, she never got a break, and she suffered more than any other person I've ever seen in my life. And after he left us, which he left us in 1975, and moved to Florida and went down there and went to work with his older brother, my Uncle Clifford, who is a devout Christian. He's in his 80s now and still a devout Christian. So he went down there, but my mother never got a break, because then the entities began to manifest and attack her, physically attack her on a regular basis throughout the rest of her life. And another interesting story that I didn't know about until my brother informed me of this, and my brother is a good man, but he still suffers from trauma, and he just can't open up and share the things that took place. So I was shocked when he told me what I'm about to tell you. He said that one evening before my father left us, and I was staying over at my grandmother's home, so it was just he there with my parents, and he saw my dad come in a drunken stupor. You know, he'd come in from the bar, and he said, and I absolutely believe him, because number one, he never talks about these things, and secondly, he would never lie about it. He said that as my dad entered in through the front door, he saw an invisible force pick him up from around his throat and literally throw him through those two closet doors at that coat closet there. No. And he said he'll never forget it. So, you know, again, that's the level of attack that my dad and the family were under. So after he leaves, then my mother comes under, you know, this regular physical attack from these entities that were coming and manifesting and choking her. And my mother had cuts and scratches and bruises and, you know, you name it, marks on her long after my dad had left. And it got to the point to where she couldn't sleep in her bed anymore, and she ended up having to sleep in with us.
Yeah, so there's some weird things. First of all, I'm ecstatic that Uncle Clifford is still around. So I just want to give a shout out to Uncle Clifford.
Man. Yeah.
And also, I want to say that there's this like changing of the guard thing. Like, your father wanted to stay in the house, and then he left. And then when he left, your mother decided she wanted to stay in the house. Is that right? Did I pick that up from the book correctly?
Yeah, and I think what happened, John, is that when people are exposed to torment, abuse, and sort of like being in captivity for a period of time, then it's almost like they become resigned to accept whatever happens. And, you know, it's almost like a compliance, you know. Just take it like, and I gave the analogy of, you know, being prisoners in a POW camp. You know, it's how it was. It was like that, and we just expected it to happen. We took it in stride, and we became zombie-like, to be honest with you. And again, once the frequency and vibration is lowered that much, we're wide open for these demonic forces to have their way. And that's exactly what was happening. So we expected these things to happen. They did happen. We became very cold and distant to each other because we were all so zombie-like. We were hardly ever getting any sleep. And it seemed like when my mother would try and get some sleep, even on days to where she'd lay on the sofa and try and take a nap because she hadn't had any sleep from the night before, there were times that, again, an unseen invisible force would actually pick the sofa up, you know, levitate the sofa and start to violently shake it. My mother would have to jump off of something that's a couple feet in the air and run out of the house up to the neighbor's house until we come home, you know, from school. I mean, that's how bad it was.
Okay, so can you describe the different apparitions, or I'm not sure the best way to put it, the different faces of the phenomenon?
Yeah, and, you know, for me, the first physical attack that I had was in the next year after my sister in 1971, and I was same thing like her in my sleep, you know. So in the bedroom, my bed was closest to the door of the hallway, and my brother's was closest to the window. And I recalled very much like her, something waking me up from my sleep one night and couldn't see anyone or anything there, but knew something was there. And I started to get out of the left side of the bed to go and get my parents to wake them up. And as I did that, just incredible, I can't even describe the power that I felt. Again, now I'm a skinny little kid, but still, that power, that force was just unlike anything, that I had ever had put their hands on me, or whatever you would say, their power, their force, whatever. But it grabbed me by my shoulders and threw me back on the bed, pinned me on the bed, on my back. And I've given well over 2,000 interviews, and each and every time I talk about this, I can't in words describe the level of trauma, fear, terror. I thought I was going to die. And so I'm pinned to the bed. I couldn't move. The only thing that would move were my eyes. And so many horrible things happened during the course of that. And then I remember very distinctly seeing this manifestation, this entity, appearing and manifesting at the foot of my bed. And I believed that it was some type of angelic divine being. And all the horrible things that were happening to me suddenly stopped, as she appeared. And the most amazing thing about that, John, is that she looked exactly like my mother. And she even saved my mother on several occasions when she was being attacked. Other family members saw her as well. So that's one of the entities. And then another entity, that's the only divine entity that we saw. But the other four were absolutely demonic and sinister entities. And one of the main players out of that four was this entity that we called the Undertaker. He had looked like he was wearing like some kind of Undertaker suit or something. He had black hair and a black beard, very chalky white skin, black eyes, very sinister entity, and many people saw him over the years. My mother was the first to see him, but many other family members and even friends saw that entity. And another entity was a being that had curly red hair. It was like close cut, curly red hair with a long scar down the left side of his face. And again, the chalky white skin and black eyes. That was another entity that was attacking my mother on a regular basis. And then a third entity was a female, and she had the look of a witch, long dark hair, long black gown, very sharp facial features, and again, the same chalky white skin and black eyes. And then the fourth entity, and I actually have taken photos of this entity, and again, they're in the book and on the website. That's that dark force entity that is a black hooded figure that had glowing red eyes. And again, it was not only my mom and I and others that saw this thing. There were many people. There were people that would sign affidavits stating that they saw this entity and other entities in the house. So those were and another interesting thing, John, is that towards the end, when the word got out and it was going around the neighborhood, people were lining up at the front fence every night in hopes of catching a glimpse of something. And, some people did say they saw things or whatever. But what was really interesting is suddenly all of these cats, and I don't know where they came from, they started surrounding the house. They were laying up on the roof. It was the most bizarre thing, and we never owned a cat. We had dogs, we never owned a cat, but yet, towards the end, and I don't know what that meant, what it was, but man, they were surrounding the house up on the roof and everything, and it's just incredible. So the amount of experiences and sightings that took place and interactions and attacks as well, just totally off the charts. And, I've been involved in hundreds of cases helping people all over the world. And I have to tell you, in all the cases that I have come across, that I've been involved in, none had the level or the length of the attack that my case had. And I don't boast about that. Believe me, I don't want to have that distinction. But, in all honesty, I have never come across another case quite like that and just the sheer amount of abuse, attacks, suffering, and one horrible thing after another, and one family tragedy after another, just off the charts.
Yeah. I mean, we're really kind of going over a very abbreviated version of it here. Your book is extensive. So I know I only got you for a little bit longer. So can we talk a little bit about Uncle Clifford and
Sure.
Yeah, and like kind of his role in, I don't want to say teaching you, but kind of maybe explaining to you. I don't know, however you would describe it, but you would go on to use later at the climax of the story.
Yeah, he was certainly the hero of that story and book, that's for sure. And I praise God for working through him to plant those good seeds with me, because, again, back then, we had never attended church as children, never baptized. We believed in God. And it's interesting, John, because through all of that, and not having any type of religious background at all, I still had this blind faith in God. I just knew God was real. I just didn't know how to connect with him. And if I knew then what I know now, boy, it would have been a whole different story. But, everything is for a reason. And like I stated earlier, the reason for that was for me to have those experiences to be where I'm at now and helping others. But my Uncle Cliff played an instrumental role in that, because we had gone for a visit in 1979 down to Florida, and I have to tell you, and I'm sorry to say this, that I very much hated my father for many, many years, and I started really hating him when he started delivering those beatings to my mother in 1973. So I hated him for many, many years, probably from 1973 to 1981, and we went to Florida for a visit. I didn't want to go, but my younger brother loved my dad unconditionally, no matter what. So I went along with him to go, and it turned out to be a tremendous blessing, because I ended up having a lengthy discussion with my Uncle Cliff. And again, this was my dad's older brother, devout Christian, very, very good man. And we had a lengthy discussion about God and faith and things that I certainly never knew. And he told me that we could take power and authority over these things, by the power of God in Jesus' name. And I never knew that. And so by him giving me this information and planting these seeds of faith, it was very uplifting. It truly was. It was very uplifting to me. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had hope. And little did I know that I would be engaging in my first battle against these demonic forces upon returning home from that trip and that meeting with him. So God knows what he's doing, and he puts people in our lives for a reason, and he has people to give us a message for a reason. Every single thing in life is for a reason. There's no such thing as a coincidence, that's for sure.
Yeah, so it's like, to me, it's like it seems that everybody around you was kind of hopeless. You were just kind of like floating through. It seems like you were all kind of resigned to just this awful situation. And all of a sudden, Uncle Clifford comes in and he was like, hey, by the way, God is prevalent. And he finds a way to give you some kind of agency in this hopeless situation. And I think that is super powerful, especially to a child who's having to deal with, or in the past having to deal with a domestic abuse problem, because you have no agency. Like I said, I kind of alluded to it before. Like I've lived through this over and over again. Mm-hmm. So, I think that's one of the reasons that your story speaks to me so much, because it's just like, but
yeah, and I'm sorry that you had to live through that, and it's terrible. And that's why I take these things personally, John. When people come to me for help, and I've helped people from all over America and 40 other countries as well, and when people come to me for help, I take it very, very personally. I don't want to see anybody suffer. I want to see everybody, happy and moving forward in life. So, I do take it very, very personally.
Yeah, and I think it's also important that like your job titles, along with exorcist and spiritual warfare and deliverance minister, you also have like stuff like life coach, because I think it's all linked up. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's all, that's really why I appreciate you and your story, and especially your book. And I thank you so much that you sent it to me, because I really got a lot out of it.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I thank you for taking the time to read it. And we'll make this the first of some more interviews, because boy, this just unfolds more and more and more. And the sheer amount of experiences that I've had over the course of my lifetime is just mind-boggling. It's unfathomable that one man could experience all these things. But again, it's all part of my journey, and it's all part of who I am now and who God has created me to be.
Yeah. So I know that I do only have you for a few more minutes. So I was wondering if there's any way that you can kind of, I don't know, like Ziploc down, package up this your first battle with these demonic forces in the house here, with the holy water in this idea.
And you took the thoughts out of my head anyway, because I was actually headed there. And so again, after returning from this trip and this most important meeting with my Uncle Clifford, we get home, and a couple of things had taken place, and one is our little black poodle named Fuzzy had gone missing. And, this is a little tiny dog, and we had a 4-foot-high fence, and suddenly this dog is gone. And this happened over the 4th of July of that year, 1979. And our little dog was left in the yard with my aunt's Keyshounds, like a husky, looked like a husky type of dog. And they got back, and our dog was gone, and that dog was still there, but was very traumatized. And so my mother, and at that point in time, she had a new man in her life named Richard. And Richard was very much like my dad. And, was attacked physically there many, many times, was terrified to be there. If not for his love for my mother, he would have been gone from the first time. But so they searched for the dog and could not find the dog. And then they decide they're going to come back and try and get a little bit of sleep and get up early the next morning and resume the search. And Richard woke up first and saw just gobs and hunks of this black hair, which they assume was Fuzzy's hair, everywhere, all over the bed, all over them, and in the bedroom, leading into the hallway, going up the hallway, leading into the bathroom sink, the kitchen sink. Never saw the dog again, yet there were just gobs and gobs and gobs of this, what they thought was black dog hair, Fuzzy's hair. And so that was the first thing that had taken place. So we get back, my mother informs us that this has happened, and we were so upset, and I was very angered by it. So then another thing that had taken place is that we had a painting of my sister that my mother had hanging on the wall for many years, and it was a painting of her from age 3. And it was a little girl, and like just a white dress, innocent looking little painting. It suddenly, my mother had gotten up one morning, and the painting seemed to have come to life, and the eyes had changed. It looked like they were looking at you. The mouth had changed to like this downward snarl or sneer, however you would, say it. And it had become very sinister. So she had taken it down, and she put it in a closet in the bedroom. And on the day that we returned, she had my brother had gone outside to play. I was in the house with her and Richard, and my grandmother was there. And my aunt and her boyfriend were coming over, and they wanted to see this painting and what had happened and all this. And my aunt and her boyfriend arrived. My mother goes back to retrieve the painting, and then all of a sudden she's picked up by an unseen force from behind her neck, and thrown through the air and landed up into her makeup table, and she was busted open. She was scratched. She had marks on the back of her neck where she was grabbed. She was hurt pretty bad, and something inside of me at that point snapped. And I was very concerned for my mother, but I was also enraged. And all the years of abuse and torment and being just absolutely kept in total fear all the time, and then just every horrible thing that had happened to me, you know, it just all manifested in rage. And also at this point in time, what I failed to mention is that we had a Catholic priest involved in this. He was involved for the last 16 months that we lived there, and he did everything that he could, and I appreciate it. And my family and I are not Catholic, but my step-grandfather was, and he had gone to his church, told them what was happening, and they sent a priest out, and I do appreciate it. So at that point, he was bringing mason jars full of holy water and telling my mother to throw it wherever she saw these things or heard things. So on this day, when all this is taking place, I grab a jar of the holy water and a Bible, and I start going through the house. Now, I'm 13 years old. Keep that in mind. And I'm calling these things out. Now, where I made my mistake, and I guess I didn't hear my uncle correctly on this, we should always be binding and casting out. And it's by the mighty power of Yahweh in Jesus' name. And on that day, I'm commanding them to show themselves. And so the house, it looked like a scene from a horror film. You know, it starts shaking, things are falling off the wall, the doors are opening and slamming, all this. I didn't care. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was enraged. And so at one point, these things actually did manifest in front of me. So the adults, so here I am, 13 years old, and I've got 5 adults behind me. My mother was injured, but she didn't want to go to the hospital or anything like that. So they are behind me in the dining room. I'm in the living room. And these 4 entities appeared in greenish, yellowish beams of light, like a scene from Star Trek, you know, beam me up the sky or whatever. And they appeared in these beams of light, and one was the black-haired entity that I described, you know, black beard, black suit. The other was the red-haired entity that I described, and then the third was the woman, the witch-looking entity, and the fourth, the black-hooded entity with the glowing red eyes. And everybody saw them clearly for several seconds, and then they just dissipated. They didn't just suddenly vanish, John. They dissipated. And as they were fading out, all of the chaotic things that were taking place in the house stopped, and we ended up leaving and going to Richard's house for the evening. So that was my first battle, and the first time that I actually engaged those demonic forces in battle in 1979 at the age of 13.
Wow. That's a hellacious story, and I feel like we could just keep going on because I have like a million questions. But I understand.
I hope you'll have me back again, and we'll do a part 2, and we'll cover some more bases.
Yeah, I would love to know, like, not that you have to answer or anything, but I'd love to know, like, your procedure, like when people reach out to you now for help, like the kind of things that you do to sort of, you know, get ready, or like to help them, or like the aftercare, if that's such a thing. Yeah. I would love to know that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I would definitely love to have.
We'll talk about it. That's for sure. I can provide those answers.
Yeah, I would definitely love to have you back to talk about it pretty soon. Like I said, we're on this tear on this spiritual warfare stuff. It's probably going to take us a few months. So maybe we can have you back sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. You just let me know and we'll make it happen.
All right. So thank you very much. And I want to give you this opportunity to, you know, plug whatever you have up there, or whatever you have coming up, or whatever you want to talk about.
Well, I thank you again. I really, truly appreciate you having me on, John. God bless you and your family, and look forward to the next time. And God bless everybody out there that's listened into this. And for anybody out there that's having any issues, I've said it a million times. I guess I'll say it 1,000,001. I'm always busy, but never too busy to help somebody. So if you're having these types of issues and you need help, contact me. Just go to visit my site, billbean.net or billbeanministries.com, or just punch my name into Google. You'll get it. You'll get the sites, and you can contact me directly from the websites. And if I don't get back to you, then one of my assistants will get back to you very quickly. And don't hesitate. And don't let this go on, because if this starts up, you want to nip it in the bud before it starts to really gain in power and momentum. So please don't hesitate. Contact me, billbean.net, billbeanministries.com, or just punch my name into Google. It's very easy to get a hold of me. And same thing for anybody out there that wants to read my this book, Dark Force Revisited, or any of the other books that I've written. I have a free audio book as well called 10 Steps to Victory, which is on the websites. Don't hesitate. Visit the websites, get a copy, and I'll even sign it for you. So anything that I can do to be in service, I certainly will do it.
Well, thank you very much, sir. And I think that we are going to be hopefully we're going to be talking again very, very soon.
No question about it. And thank you so much again, John. God bless you and have a great evening.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review.
Hey, did you learn something? Did you laugh? Supporting me is a way for you to be a part of the Abercast and ensure its growth and sustainability. It also means I can create a normal schedule for shows and bonus shows, as well as the exclusive Fellowcraft episodes. By supporting the show, you are not only a listener, but you are a part of the show. You supporting the show gives me a way to offer fun rewards as a thank you for showing your appreciation and support for our projects. Do you have an idea for a reward that you don't see? Let me know. My supporters are my partners. I currently pay for you to listen to the Abercast. Not only do I pay the hosting bills out of my own pocket, I volunteer my time and talent to each and every episode of the Abercast. The price of books, the time and resources of reading and researching, the massive amounts of gin and tonic needed, the equipment it takes to record the shows, the time and resources it takes to create the bonus material, and the cost to maintain the internet presence. Is it worth your support? I don't know. I'm proud of the Abercast, and I feel like I'm improving all the time. In addition to creating the show that you dig and that you are excited about, I also have a full-time commitment and other obligations. So why financial support? All of the supporters help me focus my time on the quality and development of the podcast. And what if you can't afford, $1 or $3 or $10 or whatever a month? Believe me, I get that. There are many degrees of support, but if you can't support the show financially, please consider leaving a 5-star rate and review on your preferred podcast app. And don't forget that you could sign into the mailing list and still unlock a lot of bonus content. Thank you. I cannot put into words how much it means to me that you listen to the show each time I post a new episode. Your feedback, support, and love of the stories that we talk about here is what keeps me going.